I never thought my marriage would come to this. I had given my wife everything: love, loyalty, and years of unwavering commitment. But the day she looked me in the eye and said, "I don't owe you satisfaction," something inside me broke. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, cold, distant, as if my feelings didn't matter. I stood there stunned, wondering when the woman I married had turned into a stranger. At first I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just upset. Maybe she didn't mean it. But as days passed, I started noticing things I had ignored before. The late nights, the locked phone, the way she barely looked at me anymore. I had always trusted her, believed in our vows, but now doubt crept in like a shadow I couldn't escape. Was I the fool for holding on to something that was already gone? One evening, I finally confronted her. I asked her if she even cared about this marriage anymore, if she cared about me. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said, "You expect too much. I don't owe you anything." That was it. That was the moment I knew I had been fighting for something that only I wanted to save. So I made a decision. If she didn't owe me satisfaction, then I didn't owe her commitment. No more waiting, no more pleading, no more being the only one trying. She thought I would always stay no matter how she treated me. She was wrong. What happened next? She never saw it coming. And when she realized the truth, it was already too late. I didn't say another word that night. I just watched her, trying to figure out if the woman sitting across from me was even the same person I had married. She didn't seem to care. She barely looked up from her phone, as if my silence didn't matter. Maybe to her it really didn't, but something shifted inside me. I had spent years being the husband who gave everything, who overlooked the small things, who always tried to fix what was broken. This time, I wasn't going to. If she believed she didn't owe me anything, then why should I keep pretending I owed her my loyalty? I wasn't going to beg for love that should have been given freely. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. She was still asleep, wrapped in the same indifference that had become normal between us. I grabbed my keys and walked out, not bothering to leave a note. I needed time to think, space to breathe. But more than that, I needed to see things clearly, for once, without the weight of my emotions clouding my judgment. I drove without a destination, just letting my thoughts run wild. Was this how love was supposed to end? Not with a fight, not with tears, but with silence? I thought about every moment I had overlooked, the distant stares, the forced smiles, the excuses that never quite added up. Had I been blind, or had I just refused to see the truth? By the time I finally parked, I had made up my mind. If she wasn't willing to fight for us, then neither was I. But she had no idea what that really meant. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a small hotel on the other side of town. No calls, no texts. I wanted to see how long it would take for her to notice my absence. Hours passed, then a full day. Nothing. It was as if I had disappeared, and she didn't care enough to ask where I was. That told me everything I needed to know. As I sat in that quiet room, I thought about all the years I had given her, the sacrifices, the late nights I stayed up just to make sure she had everything she needed. And for what? To be treated like a backup plan? To be told I was expecting too much for wanting love in return? I wasn't angry. I was just done. The next morning, I finally checked my phone. No missed calls, just a single text from her. "Where are you?" That was it. No worry, no concern, just a question, like I was an afterthought. I didn't reply. Instead, I decided it was time to stop being the only one who cared. If she wanted distance, I would give it to her. That evening, I did something I never thought I would. I went out. Not to drink, not to numb the pain, but to remind myself what it felt like to be seen, to be valued. I sat in a quiet cafe, just watching people, wondering if love was supposed to feel this exhausting. And then I met someone. Not in a way that meant anything. Not yet. But in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. I felt free. I sat in that cafe longer than I expected, lost in thought. The stranger at the next table noticed me, offered a polite smile, and for some reason I smiled back. It wasn't flirting. It wasn't anything inappropriate. It was just a simple moment, one that reminded me of something I had forgotten. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't some obligation someone had to tolerate. I was still a person who deserved to be seen. When I finally walked out, I checked my phone again. This time there were more messages. Where are you? Are you coming home? Why are you ignoring me? I could almost hear the irritation in her words, but not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she say she missed me. It was just control. She had been so sure I would always stay that she never considered what would happen if I stopped trying. I didn't go home that night either. The next morning, I made my decision. If she wasn't going to appreciate me, then I would stop being someone to take for granted. I had spent years making sure she was happy, but now it was time to focus on myself. So I did something that shook her world. I walked away. Completely. No more calls, no more texts. I let her sit in the silence she had created between us. At first, she acted like she didn't care. But then something changed. The messages became desperate. The calls wouldn't stop. And then one night she showed up where I was staying. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her voice unsteady. We need to talk. But now I wasn't sure if I even wanted to listen. She stood there gripping the doorframe like she wasn't sure if she should step inside. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar space, the proof that I had been living without her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just watched her, waiting to see what she would say now that she finally cared enough to show up. I didn't know where you were, she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. You just left. I almost laughed at the irony. That's exactly how I had felt for months, like she had left me long before I ever walked out that door. But I didn't say it. I just leaned back, crossing my arms, waiting. She had spent so much time acting like she didn't owe me anything. Now I wanted to see what she had to offer. She stepped inside, hesitating before closing the door behind her. I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't how we handle things. You're acting different. I raised an eyebrow. I thought you didn't owe me an explanation, and I certainly don't owe you one either. That hit her. I saw it in the way her expression shifted, her confidence faltering. For the first time, she looked unsure, even nervous. I didn't mean it like that, she murmured. I didn't think you'd actually leave. And there it was. She had taken me for granted, assumed I would always be there, no matter how little she gave in return. But now she wasn't so sure. I could feel the weight of the moment, the way everything was about to change. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't the same man she had walked away from. She stood there waiting for me to say something, to give her the reaction she was used to. The man who always tried to fix things, who always caved when she pulled away. But that man was gone. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch between us. She was uncomfortable now, shifting on her feet like she wasn't sure what to do. Maybe for the first time, she felt what I had felt for months. Uncertainty, doubt, the fear of losing something without even realizing it was slipping away. I don't know what you want me to say, I finally said. You made it clear that you don't owe me anything, and I finally understand that I don't owe you anything either. Her eyes widened slightly as if she hadn't expected me to turn her own words against her. That's not fair, she whispered. I was upset. I didn't mean it like that. I let out a small, humorless laugh. It's funny how people only realize what they have when it's gone. She swallowed hard. I don't want it to be gone. For a moment, I almost felt something, almost. But then I thought about all the times I had begged for her to care, all the times I had given without receiving. And suddenly, her words weren't enough. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. I held it between my fingers for a second before setting it gently on the table between us. Then maybe, I said quietly, you should have thought about that before you stopped trying. I walked past her, leaving her standing there staring at the ring. For the first time, she knew what it felt like to be left behind. I stepped outside, feeling the cool night air against my skin. It was the first time in a long time that I felt light, as if I had finally let go of something that had been weighing me down for years. Behind me, I knew she was still standing there, staring at that ring, maybe realizing, too late, that she had pushed too far. But that was no longer my problem. As I reached my car, I took one last deep breath and looked up at the sky. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was just free. People always assume the hardest part of a breakup is the moment you walk away. But the truth is, the hardest part is realizing that you should have walked away a long time ago. And now that I wasn't looking back. I opened the car door, got in, and drove off into the night. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about her. I was finally thinking about me.